way to meet Nick. He runs what is apparently one of Japan's best regenerative farms. I'm actually super excited about seeing his setup because he's been introduced to me as the real deal. That's some pretty legit praise if you ask me, so gotta find out if it's true.
This is a small valley. There's mountain on both sides. It goes between maybe 980 to 1020 meters. The land is all old rice paddy terraces. 2 streams that arrive and come down both sides of the farm, so there's a year-round supply of natural water. The mountains supply, well, lots of organic matter. There's cool air coming down as well, which means that it's, on one hand, much more workable as an individual, but also, much more pleasant, I think, for the plants as well. And it was exactly what I was looking for. Up a valley, it's small, it's narrow, totally unsuited to modern industrial farming. I don't think I was ever the kind of person who would have been happy growing 50 hectares of any one variety. That would just be too boring, too unsatisfying. Much more fun, much more interesting, much more insightful to be doing 50, 100, 150, 200 different varieties. That's much more representative of what happens in nature. I, on this farm, have a total of 200 beds, all divided up into groups of 5 beds. I have 10 plant groups. I basically rotate these 10 plant groups over the entire surface of the farm. So I'm trying to imitate what happens in a forest. You never see anybody moving around in a forest with a plough. It doesn't work that way. Stuff accumulates on the surface, and then animals, microbes from down below, worms, they move up and they basically do the ploughing. Irregardless of what I'm growing and where I'm growing it, the nutrients that I put in are the same. I apply to the surface, then I work it very, very gently with a broad fork, but not deeply at all. I have 5 individual no-till permanent beds, so they have a very particular ecosystem where I never walk, where I never apply pressure, separated by 45 centimetres of footpath, which is walked upon, which is not grown, and which is therefore comparatively much harder. So rather than having just 20 metres of edge, I have somewhere between 55 and 60 metres of edge. There's much more interaction between the ecosystem which is here and then this ecosystem here, which is currently dominated by cereals. Birds can come, insects can come, all these nutrients can be brought in, can be brought out. It makes for a much richer, more interesting ecosystem, which makes for more resilience, for healthier plants, for healthier soil. Conventionally grown vegetables cost far, far more than organic vegetables, but the costs are hidden. So the only reason that modern farming is in any way, superficially viable is A, because they're getting constant infusions of money, and then they're also robbing from future generations through ecological degradation. When people normally talk about organic farming costing more than conventional farming, they're not taking any of that into account. And they're not taking into account the slightly less obvious benefits to organically and no-till and permaculture grown vegetables too. When I've cut the green manure, say in February, March, then I cover it with a black tarp to basically break it down before planting out the beds. I have lots and lots of beds covered in a thick black tarp when it's still cold here, so underneath the tarps it's very warm. So all the animals tend to congregate under the black sheets. And when you have mice, then you have snakes, and when you have snakes, then you have hawks and all kinds of things. So the frogs are part of that system. It's about patterns. If you can identify the function of something, if you can identify its place in a cycle, in a process. They're all basically plastic tarps, so it's heavy duty, thick plastic. So that's obviously fossil fuel I'm using. Whereas if I wasn't using that sheet, which would have probably looked far better, I'd probably be having to use a tractor, using a 2-wheel tractor, which would be using far more petrol. So I'm using petrol, but I'm just very consciously going for the way of farming which involves the least amount. Because I'm an organic farmer, this stuff here, the bottom part of the plant is almost more valuable than the top part of the plant. So basically the idea is to have everything internal, not bringing stuff in from outside, and to not be letting the straw go anywhere else either. It's basically to kind of try and create an autonomous closed cycle. So basically everything goes back into the soil at some point. Even with stuff that goes into the chicken coop is only going via the chicken coop, because when it comes out of the chicken coop it's going back onto the beds. This conviction that I must make enough GMO corn to feed 500,000 families is kind of what's part of the problem, really. If you start small and say, no, it's not my responsibility to feed 5,000 families, it's my responsibility to feed myself, and then my family, and then my community. Start small. When you start big, that's where things go askew. 2.5 years ago, there was big heavy rains in Nagano, and this area was one of the most badly affected in Japan. There was lots of water, the stream overflowed into the field, but because the beds are all permanent beds and therefore there's no hard pan, for a few hours everything was underwater, but the water basically then all escaped through the beds. So the next day everything was basically back to normal, whereas anywhere that was being conventionally managed on conventional government-approved farming guidelines, well, they weren't so lucky. So right here we're inside one of the two main hoop houses, which are both situated towards the northern side of the property so that they're not cutting out sunlight from any of the other crop. The middle 5 beds here are planted with pumpkins. From my point of view, they're small enough to grow on string like here. Because they're being grown vertically, I get more pumpkins per plant. So basically one house is nightshades, one house is cucurbits, and then in winter one does leaf vegetables, one does root vegetables, and I alternate. So between 2 houses I don't have to have say 5 years between tomatoes and 5 years between cucumbers, because in between the cucumbers there are leaf vegetables and root vegetables, which makes conventional farmers, well, worried. Especially if you're not using chemicals, because they think it's impossible, but it's possible because you're alternating and using other plants in between to break the individual cycles. We as human beings tend to feel anxious when things aren't exactly the way we want them to look. Corn can be of different sizes, it can be growing at different angles, it can be looking in all different kinds of ways and yet be perfectly healthy and taste perfectly good. If I was relying just on straw, well, these beds would be pretty bare right now. So you can put this much straw on a bed, and like here, you come back a month or 2 later and it's basically all gone. I mean, not gone, it's been absorbed into the soil, it's been broken down. So having this come in through the straw, take over, fulfill the same functions, protects the ground from the sun, it keeps it moist, it keeps it dry, it prevents other weeds from coming in, and it's a kind of a last resort crop as well. Everything is basically sown in cell trays and then planted out by hand. Barley, wheat, rye, spelt, all looks exactly like grass when it's young. So if you sow everything into a cell tray, you wait 2 weeks and then you plant it out, then you know what's a crop and what's not. And it makes it much easier to plant, it makes it much easier to control weeds. Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There should be 5 rows by 32, I think it is. Gives you more or less a perfect handful of cereal, because I also harvest by hand with a sickle. One side of the farm I let the grass grow every year because I harvest yomogi, one of the wormwood family wild herbs, which I can sell. Something else called nobiru, which is like a Japanese wild onion. So they all grow in those areas, so I can harvest them basically before annual crops come in. And then I let the grass basically go, and then I cut it all back before winter. I'm dropping all that organic matter on the soil, and then I'm using the snow over winter to come down and to decompose that and turn that back into the soil. The kind of farming that I use on my farm works because it's where I am, but it's not going to work for somebody who's on an island at, I don't know, 5 meters altitude in the middle of the inland sea in Japan. As in nature, we need biodiversity and solutions too.
Hi, thank you so much for watching. I'm Jakob and I run this channel. If you can help me make films like this by becoming a monthly supporter on my Patreon site, I would really appreciate it. There's another film I recently made about a natural farm in Hiroshima, Japan. I think you would also really like it and get inspired by it.